Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Morning Shot.
Audrey.
Yeah.
Audrey.
What?
Where are you?
I'm right here.
Why is it so dark here? Is there a blackout?
Relax, I'm right here next to you, Emaad. Now, for the benefit of our listeners out there, it's almost pitch black in the studio right now. But no, it's not a blackout. We're doing our own version of Earth Hour today, ahead of the official 18th edition of Earth Hour, which will take place at 8:30 p.m. this Saturday.
I almost had a heart attack there, Audrey. In what's known to be the largest global environmental movement, millions of individuals and businesses around the world, including landmarks, will be switching off their lights for an hour on the 23rd of March.
Yes, and we were a couple of days early just to take it beyond Earth Hour in the spirit of doing something for our planet, because we're joined in the studio this morning by Vivek Kumar, CEO of WWF-Singapore. Vivek, I want to say it's good to see you, but it's pretty dark in here, so good to hear you this morning.
Good morning, Audrey and Emaad. It's so amazing to be here. It looks like you are ushering in Earth Hour in a fantastic way.
May I ask if this is your first ever interview conducted in the dark?
As a matter of fact, it is.
Oh, yes.
But I would also say this, Emaad, that as they say, night is darkest just before dawn. So hope you're also ushering in the dawn of better climate
You are
action.
a true poet. It is World Poetry Day today as well. I must commemorate you on that wonderful line.
Yes, this is my first In the Dark interview as well, so I'm going to remember this. So it's been more than 15 years since Earth Hour first started. So could you put it into perspective for us? What has changed since then? And just in a practical sense, what difference does this 1 hour really make?
So what has changed is since 2007, when only one city celebrated or observed Earth Hour, now Earth Hour is observed in more than 190 countries around the world. So it is a truly global movement. It is celebrated even by those who don't have access to regular electricity. And I guess the question will be, then why do they even observe it?
Right.
And I think the reason it is done is because people want to send a message to the policymakers, to the businesses, to the community, that climate change really matters. And what we have seen is also through successive Earth Hours, people turning up to understand or spending their moment to understand what is going on from a science-based knowledge perspective about climate change, and therefore what it is that we would want to contribute to, what it is that we would want to be part of. And I think that's fantastic, and that remains to be the core of Earth Hour.
Let's talk about that science element of it. Scientists have repeatedly said that we're on course to breach the 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperature increase limit set by the Paris Climate Agreement by 2030. So just to play devil's advocate, what's the point of furthering climate action if we know that it's inevitable that we'll breach that tipping point?
It's a great question, Emaad, and I have been asked this before. I will give you the analogy of our own human health, and we are just coming out of the shadows of COVID, so I think it is relevant. If we had less than 37.5 degrees temperature, we will be fine to walk in anywhere, as we would recall. If that went up by 1 degree, I think it'll be a challenge. If it went up by just a couple of degrees more, even doctors will be worried. But the question is, will we give up? And the answer has to be a resounding no. It is the same with the health of our planet. Every fraction of a degree must matter. And where we believe is there are two crises unfolding at the same time, and we need to pay attention to both. One is the climate crisis, which, as you rightly pointed out, we are very close to 1.5 degree, and the whole world is trying in whatever way to address it. But there is another crisis unfolding, and that is the loss of biodiversity crisis. So in 1998, when WWF started the first Living Planet report, we realized the world had lost 30% of global biodiversity since 1970. 2010, we had lost 50%, 50.
Wow.
And in our latest Living Planet report, the world has lost 69% of biodiversity. So if you begin to look at the two are intertwined, interlinked, and we must look after nature if we want to battle climate change.
Yeah, and I mean, if not for ourselves, then at least for posterity, for our future generations, right? Because the situation is dire. Like you said, we're closer than we think to the 1.5 degree limit.
Yes, we are. I mean, we have already breached 1.1, 1.2, depending on how you look at it. But the point is, we have to be careful that we do not give up at a time when there is no end to it. The other point I want to highlight also is we often talk about this with a sense of despair. And I am an optimist at heart, and I want to look at it from the perspective of a sense of hope as well. So there is one data point which is very interesting. If Southeast Asia does nothing about combating our emissions, we could lose as much as 1/3 of our GDP. However, if we do it right and we are able to embrace renewable energy, we are able to embrace circular economy, Asia Pacific, and this is a World Economic Forum estimate, could gain as much as $4 trillion by embracing these changes. So there is an opportunity, and I think there is enough reason for us to keep going for hope.
Yeah, well, Vivek, you talked about not giving up, but it feels like we've been talking about climate action for a long time, right? It's been many years. We've had multiple COP meetings, green conferences, countries coming forward to set green policies, and yet it still seems like we're so far away from our target. So what's the biggest change when it comes to climate action today?
You're right. I think there is often a sense of despair that we are trying to pull a world together with many different priorities for policy makers, for electorates, and for businesses, and so on and so forth. And yet we all realize that this is one challenge that unites us, that we must fight together. So there are a couple of things that are heartening for me personally. So a couple of COPs ago, nature was mentioned, and this may be a surprise to you, for the very first time in a COP cover document. Before that, nature was not even mentioned.
Amazing.
And since then, there are a couple of treaties on which WWF has been working together with other conservation organizations that have really gone through the finish line. One of them is the High Seas Treaty. So now the marine life in the high seas can also come under the purview of marine protected areas. The second is the commitment the governments have made to halt the decline and restore nature to 30% by 2030. These are promising. However, what all COPs must do is we should stop looking at nature and climate separately. They are interlinked. Right. And we are not waiting for that to happen. In Singapore, WWF-Singapore has started our Earth Hour Summit, which brings together policymakers, diplomats, CEOs, C-suite leaders. And on the 19th of April, when we meet for the Earth Hour Summit 2024, we are focusing on the dual challenge of climate and nature, biodiversity loss, and how do we connect the two? How do we take action that addresses both of them?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to touch on the point you made about how this issue of climate change is often looked at through the lens of despair. The reason for that might perhaps be a lack of cohesion or effective communication even between some of the major stakeholders that are essential to make this change happen. I'm talking about investors versus scientists or conservationists. There's often a disparity when it comes to the understanding between them. Investors often want to know the quantitative results that they can expect. In reality, results might very well be intangible. What do you think must be done to narrow this gap?
This is such a timely question, Emaad, because only yesterday we have released our Sustainable Banking Assessment Report, or SUSBA report. It is the 7th edition of the report. And what we find there is the number of banks that are committing to financing net zero outcomes that has gone up from 15% to 39%.
Yep.
What we also find is that the understanding of nature-related risks and incorporating that into their investment policy is not yet there, and I think we need to do better. Again, at WWF Singapore, we don't just look at the challenge, those where we can work with the stakeholders, we want to address it as well.
Yeah.
So we convened an industry platform called the Asia Sustainable Finance Initiative, or ASFI, and there is an ASFI Academy that is part of that platform as well. And we have been creating e-learning courses so that finance professionals and investors can go through it, understand the importance of nature and what they must do about it. I'm pleased to say that almost 25,000 professionals have gone through those courses. So now is the time to turn that learning into action in how we recognize the importance of nature in the investment policy making.
All right, so talking about bridging this gap, Vivek, how powerful are partnerships when it comes to moving the sustainability needle forward? How do we measure those longer-term intangible results? Any thoughts on that?
A great point, Audrey. We have this at the core of our belief system that any change is only together possible. And therefore, together possible is actually the motto that drives us. For us, partnerships are important. It is important also to make sure we share the DNA. We share the sincerity for the kind of action we must take. Otherwise, we can't move the needle. Maybe a good example is our international partner for this Earth Hour. It's the very first time we have had an international partner, which is Epson, the printer company.
Right.
You must have heard of them.
Yeah.
So we are working together to raise awareness for the climate crisis and also disseminate the science-based knowledge and circular economy practices. They will be there at the Earth Hour Festival as well at Wisma Atria. But more importantly, we have been working with them for the last 2 years on how to address biodiversity loss. So we have this region in our backyard. It's called the Coral Triangle. I wonder if you have heard of it.
I have not.
So Coral Triangle is the coral reefs that is surrounded by the countries in Southeast Asia, 6 countries. And it is so rich in biodiversity that it is called the Amazon of Southeast Asia. It houses almost 76% of world's coral reef. And Epson and we have been working together to make sure that we can address the erosion and the biodiversity loss there. So those are the kind of partnerships that we look at forming, which are aiming to work on the ground, which is aiming to move the needle. And therefore, these are multi-year partnerships where you can go forward and make a difference.
Right, and I'm sure there are more strategic partnerships to come down the line as well. Now, before we let you go, Vivek, other than switching off their lights, which we have tried to do this morning here in the studio, are there activities that those who are interested can take part in? And what will you be doing then?
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to actually hosting the two of you this Saturday around the switch-off time when we are at Wisma Atria. So what we are doing this year is we are putting it up as Earth Hour Festival. It's a whole day of activities. And because it is on 23rd March, the team has worked very hard to pull together 23 edutainment activities, workshops, performances, booths, where people can come and learn about the 3 areas that we focus on, which is climate and sustainability, nature and biodiversity, and of course how we work with people and community. So there are booths, people can come and learn. We also have our Eco School program participants. So these are the more than 130 schools across Singapore who will be coming and doing performance. We will also be joined by professional performers. So it is going to be a day when we can renew our pledge for the planet. My favorite is the switch-off moment, because that's the time that one by one the landmarks will go dark, similar to our studio here today. And that makes you realize and believe that we are not alone. In this fight, we are together, and we can make a difference when we choose to act together.
That's fantastic. You know, I would have loved to have been there for Earth Hour, but I am going to be sitting in a comedy show in Queen Street. I wonder what I should do. Should I stand up and make an announcement?
Turn off the lights, everybody.
Yeah, turn off the lights. They might call me up on stage to do a quick gig. What are you going to be doing?
I will probably be in the dark because 8:30 is my kids' sleep time.
Oh.
So, and I'll just keep the lights off and maybe my kids will stay asleep. So that's the goal. But that sounds like a really fun event that is happening this Saturday. And Vivek, even though it's pretty dark in here, you've certainly shed a lot of light on Earth Hour and all things sustainability. Huge thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me and for joining the movement.
Thanks, Vivek. You are an example to us all. Stay with Money FM 89.3.